The fluorescent lights at Murphy's gas station buzzed like angry wasps overhead as I stood there holding my 6-month-old son Lucas, watching my wife of 8 years climb into another man's pickup truck. The whole thing happened so fast I barely had time to process it. 1 minute Vanna was arguing with me about stopping for diapers. The next, she was slamming our Honda's passenger door and walking away like she'd planned this moment for months. "Vanna, what the hell are you doing?" I called out, shifting Lucas higher on my shoulder. The baby started fussing, probably picking up on the tension radiating from every pore of my body. She didn't even turn around, just kept walking toward that rusted Chevy pickup where some guy with a mullet and grease-stained coveralls was leaning against the driver's side door, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "I'm done, Trent," she said over her shoulder. "I can't do this anymore. You take the kid. I don't care." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Around us, other customers at the gas pumps had stopped what they were doing to watch the show. A middle-aged woman in a minivan was openly staring, her mouth hanging open. 2 teenagers by the convenience store entrance had their phones out, probably recording the whole thing. I'm Trent Ardell, by the way. 32 years old. IT technician for a mid-sized insurance company in what used to be a thriving Midwestern city before the factories closed and half the downtown turned into empty storefronts and check-cashing places. I fix computers, troubleshoot network problems, and until about 30 seconds ago, I thought I had a pretty decent marriage. "Vanna, come on," I said, walking toward the truck. "We can talk about this at home. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it." That's when the guy with the mullet stepped forward. He was bigger than me, not hard to do since I'm built like a scarecrow, with arms covered in faded tattoos and the kind of swagger that comes from too many bar fights and not enough consequences. "She made her choice, buddy," he said, and I recognized the voice immediately. Beck Derron, Vanna's ex-boyfriend from high school, the one she always claimed meant nothing to her anymore. "Beck?" I stared at him, then at Vanna, who was already climbing into the passenger seat. "Are you kidding me right now?" Lucas started crying in earnest, his little fists waving in the air. I bounced him gently, trying to calm him down while my world collapsed around me. "Take care of yourself, Trent," Vanna said through the open truck window. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "And take care of Lucas. You're better at that stuff anyway." The truck rumbled awake with a noise reminiscent of a failing engine. Beck revved it a few times for show, then sped out of the parking lot, leaving me there with a wailing baby and about 20 people witnessing my very public embarrassment. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The woman in the minivan finally drove away, shaking her head. The teenagers got bored and went inside to buy energy drinks. Normal life resumed around me while mine had just imploded. Lucas was still crying, so I carried him back to our Honda and strapped him into his car seat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the buckles. The baby looked up at me with those big blue eyes, Vanna's eyes, and for a moment I thought I might lose it completely. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, though nothing about this was okay. "Daddy's got you." The drive home was a blur. I kept expecting my phone to ring, expecting Vanna to call and tell me this was all some kind of terrible joke. But the phone stayed silent, and by the time I pulled into our driveway, the reality was starting to sink in. My wife had just abandoned me and our baby at a gas station for her high school ex-boyfriend. Our house looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours earlier when we'd left to run errands. Same beige siding, same overgrown hedges, same rusty mailbox that I kept meaning to replace. But everything felt different now. Empty, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. I carried Lucas inside and set him down in his bouncy seat, then just stood there in the living room, looking around at the life Vanna and I had built together. Her law books were still scattered across the coffee table from when she'd been studying for the paralegal certification exam. Her coffee mug from this morning was still sitting on the kitchen counter, lipstick stain on the rim. That's when I noticed her suitcase was gone. I ran upstairs to our bedroom, Lucas's cries echoing behind me. Vanna's side of the closet was mostly empty. Her toiletries were gone from the bathroom. The framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Gatlinburg was face down on the dresser. She'd planned this. The whole gas station thing hadn't been spontaneous, it had been orchestrated. She'd packed her bags, arranged to meet Beck, and then waited for the right moment to make her dramatic exit. I sank down on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty hangers in her closet. Lucas was still crying downstairs, but I couldn't seem to make my legs work. This was really happening. After 8 years of marriage, after building a life together, after having a baby together, Vanna had just walked away. My phone finally rang, and for a split second, my heart jumped. But it wasn't Vanna. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Platt, the 70-something busybody who knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. "Trent, honey, I just wanted to check on you," she said, in that overly sweet voice she used when she was fishing for gossip. "I heard about what happened at Murphy's. Cindy Walsh's daughter was there, and she called her mother and, well, you know how word travels." "Great. By tomorrow morning, half the neighborhood would know that Trent Ardell's wife had run off with her ex-boyfriend at a gas station." "I'm fine, Mrs. Platt," I said, though I was anything but fine. "Thanks for checking." "That baby needs his mama," she continued, not taking the hint. "I'm sure Vanna will come to her senses soon. Young people these days, they don't understand commitment like we did in my generation." I hung up without saying goodbye and went back downstairs to tend to Lucas. He'd worked himself into a proper fit by now, his face red and scrunched up with indignation. I picked him up and walked him around the living room, bouncing him gently until he finally calmed down. "Just you and me now, buddy," I said, settling into the rocking chair Vanna had insisted we buy when she was pregnant. "We're going to figure this out." But as I sat there holding my son, staring at the empty house around me, I had no idea how we were going to figure anything out. I was a computer technician, not a single father. I knew how to install software and troubleshoot network problems, not how to raise a baby on my own. The worst part was the humiliation. The gas station scene kept replaying in my mind. Vanna walking away without looking back, Beck's smug grin, the stares from strangers, the teenagers with their phones. By now, the story was probably spreading through social media like wildfire. #EpicMarriageFail. My phone buzzed with a text message, and this time it really was Vanna. My heart started pounding as I opened it, hoping for an apology, an explanation, anything that would make sense of what had happened. Instead, I got, "Don't try to contact me. I need space to figure things out. Take care of Lucas." That was it. 8 years of marriage reduced to a text message. I stared at the phone for a long time, reading the message over and over. Take care of Lucas. Like he was a houseplant she was leaving behind, not our son. Not the baby we'd planned for and dreamed about and stayed up all night with when he had colic. Something cold and hard settled in my chest as I sat there in that rocking chair. It wasn't sadness anymore. That had burned away in the fluorescent glare of Murphy's gas station. It wasn't even anger exactly. It was something else. Something calculating. Vanna wanted space to figure things out? Fine. She'd have all the space she could handle, but she was going to learn that actions have consequences, and abandoning your family at a gas station was the kind of action that came with a very steep price. I looked down at Lucas, who had finally fallen asleep in my arms. His tiny fingers were curled into fists, and his breathing was soft and even. Whatever happened next, I was going to protect him, and I was going to make sure Vanna regretted the day she decided to trade her family for a loser with a mullet and a pickup truck. The game was on. She just didn't know it yet. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. 3 days passed before Vanna made her next move, and it was a doozy. I was at work, trying to concentrate on a server migration while Lucas stayed with the daycare provider we'd been using since Vanna went back to work, when Officer Rick Martinez showed up at my office. "Mr. Ardell, I need to speak with you about a report that was filed yesterday." Every head in the IT department turned toward my cubicle. My boss, Janet, poked her head up from her office like a prairie dog sensing danger. This was exactly the kind of attention I didn't need. "What kind of report?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "Your wife filed a complaint alleging that you abandoned your infant son and stole personal property belonging to her. She's requesting a welfare check on the child and wants her belongings returned." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around me, my co-workers were pretending to work while obviously listening to every word. Janet was making her way over, concern written all over her face. "She abandoned us," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "At Murphy's gas station on Route 9. There were witnesses." Officer Martinez looked skeptical. He was a big guy, probably in his 40s, with the kind of mustache that went out of style in the 80s but somehow worked on him. "Sir, that's not what the report says. According to Mrs. Ardell, you left her stranded at the gas station and drove off with the baby. She says you've been emotionally abusive and she fears for her safety." The room started spinning. Emotionally abusive? I'd never raised my voice to Vanna, never so much as slammed a door during an argument. The worst thing I'd ever done was leave dishes in the sink overnight. "That's not what happened," I said, standing up from my desk. "She got into another man's truck and left. I have witnesses." "We'll need to verify that," Martinez said. "In the meantime, I need to see the child and confirm he's being properly cared for." Janet finally reached my cubicle, her face flushed with embarrassment and concern. "Trent, is everything okay? Do you need to take some time off?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a misunderstanding." But it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was warfare. Vanna had fired the first shot by abandoning us, and now she was trying to control the narrative. She was painting herself as the victim and me as the abuser, probably hoping to gain sympathy and maybe even get custody of Lucas despite running off with her ex-boyfriend. I left work early and drove to the daycare to pick up Lucas, Officer Martinez following behind in his patrol car. The daycare provider, a sweet older woman named Carol, looked confused when she saw the police officer. "Is there a problem?" she asked as I gathered up Lucas's diaper bag. "Just a routine check," Martinez said, but his eyes were scanning the room, looking for signs of neglect or abuse. Lucas was perfectly fine, of course. He was clean, fed, and happy, babbling contentedly as I strapped him into his car seat. Martinez seemed satisfied, but I could tell he was still suspicious. "Mr. Ardell, I strongly suggest you and your wife work this out through proper legal channels," he said, as we stood in the daycare parking lot. "These kinds of domestic disputes can escalate quickly." Domestic dispute. That's what my marriage had become in the span of 3 days. After Martinez left, I drove straight to Murphy's gas station. The same bored-looking teenager was working the register, and when I asked about security cameras, he directed me to the manager, a thin man in his 50s named Pete, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Yeah, we got cameras," Pete said when I explained what I needed. "But I can't just hand over footage to anybody who asks. You'll need a court order or something." "This is important," I said. "My wife is claiming I abandoned her here, but it was the other way around. The footage would prove it." Pete studied me for a moment, then glanced around the empty store. "Look, I'm not supposed to do this, but I remember that night. Crazy scene. Woman got into some guy's truck and left you standing there with a baby, right?" "That's right." He disappeared into the back office and returned with a flash drive. "Security footage from that night. Camera covers the whole parking lot, but you didn't get this from me, understand?" I thanked him and drove home, my mind racing. The security footage would prove that Vanna had lied to the police, but I needed to be smart about how I used it. Going straight to the cops might backfire. They'd already heard her side of the story first, and Martinez had seemed inclined to believe her. That evening, after I'd fed Lucas and put him down for the night, I sat at my computer and watched the security footage. There it was, in grainy black and white, Vanna getting out of our car, walking to Beck's truck, climbing in, and driving away. The timestamp showed exactly when it happened, and the audio was clear enough to pick up her voice saying, "You take the kid. I don't care." It was damning evidence, but I needed to be strategic about how I used it. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day making phone calls. First, I called our bank and put a freeze on all joint accounts, claiming suspected fraudulent activity. Then I called our credit card companies and did the same thing. I changed the passwords on all our shared online accounts, Netflix, Amazon, even our grocery store loyalty card. It was petty maybe, but Vanna had declared war when she filed that false police report. If she wanted to play hardball, I was ready to play. My phone started ringing around noon, Vanna calling from a number I didn't recognize. "What did you do?" she demanded as soon as I answered. "I protected myself and my son," I said calmly. "You filed a false police report, Vanna. You told them I abandoned you and Lucas when you know damn well it was the other way around." "I was scared," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "You were acting crazy at the gas station, and I have security footage," I interrupted. "Video and audio of you getting into Beck's truck and saying you don't care about Lucas. Want to try that story again?" The line went quiet for a long moment. When Vanna spoke again, her voice was different. Harder. "You can't just freeze our accounts. I need access to our money." "Our money? You mean my money? The money I earn while you're playing house with your ex-boyfriend?" "I have a job too," she snapped. "Had a job. Past tense. I called Peterson, Walsh & Associates this morning and had a very interesting conversation with your boss about your recent personal difficulties." Another long silence. Peterson, Walsh & Associates was the law firm where Vanna worked as a paralegal. It was a small, family-owned practice that specialized in personal injury cases, and they were very concerned about their reputation in the community. "You didn't," Vanna whispered. "I sent them the security footage," I said, "along with copies of the false police report you filed. Turns out law firms don't like employees who lie to law enforcement. Something about professional ethics." The truth was, I hadn't actually sent anything to her boss yet, but Vanna's reaction told me everything I needed to know about how precarious her position at the firm really was. "Trent, please," she said, and for the first time since the gas station, she sounded genuinely upset. "Don't drag my job into this. We can work something out." "We could have worked something out before you abandoned your family at a gas station," I said. "But you made your choice. Now, you get to live with the consequences." I hung up and immediately called Peterson, Walsh & Associates. Vanna's boss, Margaret Peterson, was a stern woman in her 60s who'd built her practice on the foundation of being trustworthy and reliable. When I explained the situation and offered to email her the security footage, she was very interested. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Mr. Ardell," she said after I'd given her the basic facts. "We'll need to review this matter internally, but I want you to know that we take these kinds of allegations very seriously." By the end of the day, Vanna had been placed on unpaid leave pending an internal investigation. Her access to the firm's computers and files was suspended, and she was asked to return her company car immediately. My phone rang constantly that evening, Vanna calling from different numbers, probably using Beck's phone and his friends' phones when I kept declining her calls. I finally turned it off and spent the evening playing with Lucas, who was blissfully unaware that his parents were engaged in total warfare. The next morning brought a new development. Mrs. Platt knocked on my door while I was getting Lucas ready for daycare. "Trent, honey, I thought you should know. That wife of yours was here last night around midnight, trying to get into the house. I saw her from my bedroom window, sneaking around the backyard like some kind of burglar. Did you call the police? I asked. I thought about it, but she left when my motion sensor light came on. But I got it all on my doorbell camera if you need it. Mrs. Platt's doorbell camera had a perfect view of my backyard. The footage showed Vanna trying to jimmy open the sliding glass door, then running away when the light came on. It was exactly the kind of evidence I could use if she tried to claim I was keeping her out of her own home illegally. Can you send me a copy of that? I asked. Already did, honey. Emailed it to you this morning. I thanked Mrs. Platt and made a mental note to buy her a nice bottle of wine. Having a nosy neighbor was usually annoying, but in this case, it was incredibly useful. That afternoon, while Lucas napped, I sat down and made a list of everyone who might have witnessed the gas station scene or heard about it secondhand. The woman in the minivan, the teenagers with their phones, other customers who'd been there that night. If Vanna wanted to play the victim, I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. I started with social media, a few strategic posts in local Facebook groups, asking if anyone had witnessed the incident at Murphy's gas station and could provide a statement for legal purposes. I didn't go into details, just said that false allegations had been made, and I needed witnesses to set the record straight. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Apparently, the story of the woman who abandoned her husband and baby at a gas station had already spread through the local gossip network. People were eager to share what they'd heard, and several offered to provide written statements. One of the teenagers who'd been at the gas station that night even sent me the video he'd taken. It wasn't great quality, but it clearly showed Vanna walking away from me and getting into Beck's truck. More importantly, the audio picked up her saying, "I don't care," when I called after her. By the end of the week, I had statements from 6 witnesses, 2 videos, and security footage from the gas station. I also had documentation of Vanna's attempt to break into the house and evidence of her false police report. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Vanna had started this war by trying to destroy my reputation and take my son away from me. She'd painted me as an abuser and herself as a victim, counting on people to believe her story without question. She'd made one crucial mistake, though. She'd underestimated me. I wasn't the same passive, accommodating husband who'd let her walk all over him for years. The man who'd stood in that gas station parking lot holding his crying baby while his wife drove away, that man was gone. In his place was someone harder, someone who understood that nice guys don't just finish last. They get publicly humiliated and then blamed for it. Vanna wanted to play victim? Fine. But I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of victim she really was. The war was just getting started. Beck Derron's auto shop sat on the outskirts of town like a festering sore, surrounded by rusted car parts and weeds growing through cracked asphalt. The sign out front read Derron's Auto Repair in faded letters, half of them hanging at odd angles. It was exactly the kind of place I'd expected Vanna's knight in shining armor to operate. I'd been watching the shop for 3 days, learning Beck's routine. He opened late, around 10 in the morning, usually looking hungover. He worked alone most days, though occasionally a guy who looked like a younger, scruffier version of him would show up. That had to be his brother Reese, the one Mrs. Platt had mentioned seeing around town. Lucas was with Carol at daycare, giving me the freedom to do what needed to be done. I'd taken another sick day. My boss Janet was starting to ask questions, but I'd deal with that later. Right now, I had bigger problems to solve. I parked across the street from the shop and waited. Beck's pickup was there, along with a beat-up sedan that probably belonged to a customer. Through the open bay door, I could see Beck working under the hood of an old Camaro, his mullet tied back with what looked like a rubber band. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop harassing my workplace or you'll regret it." Vanna, obviously. Word had gotten back to her about my conversation with her boss. Good. I wanted her to know that her actions had consequences. I typed back, "Stop filing false police reports and we'll call it even." The response came immediately. I'm not the one who abandoned his family. I almost laughed out loud. Even now, even with video evidence proving otherwise, she was sticking to her story. It was impressive in a sociopathic kind of way. Another text. Beck says you better stay away from him or there will be problems. Now that was interesting. Beck was feeling threatened enough to send messages through Vanna. That meant my surveillance hadn't gone unnoticed. Good. Let him worry. I got out of my car and walked across the street. Beck looked up as I approached, his hands covered in motor oil, a cigarette dangling from his lips. You must be Trent, he said, not bothering to stand up. Heard you been asking questions around town. Just setting the record straight, I said, stopping just outside the bay door. Funny how stories get twisted when people don't have all the facts. Beck wiped his hands on a greasy rag and finally stood up. He was bigger than I remembered from the gas station, with the kind of build that came from manual labor and too much beer. The kind of guy who'd probably been getting by on intimidation since high school. Your wife came to me, he said, taking a drag from his cigarette. I didn't steal her from you. She left because she wanted to. My wife left because you've been filling her head with promises you can't keep, I replied. But that's between me and her. What I want to know is why you're threatening me through text messages. Beck's eyes narrowed. I ain't threatened nobody. There will be problems. Sounds like a threat to me. He flicked his cigarette onto the ground and stepped closer. Look, computer boy, I don't want any trouble. But Vanna's with me now, and that's how it's gonna stay. You need to accept that and move on. Computer boy. The dismissive tone, the casual arrogance, it all reminded me of every bully I'd ever encountered in school. Guys like Beck thought they could intimidate their way through life, that physical size and attitude were all they needed. They were usually right. But not this time. You're right, I said, taking a step back. I should move on. In fact, I already have. Beck looked confused. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not here to fight you for Vanna. She made her choice, and honestly, you're welcome to her. But I am curious about one thing. Yeah? What's that? How are you planning to support her? This place doesn't look like it's exactly thriving, and she just lost her job because of the false police report she filed. Beck's face darkened. Her job ain't your business anymore. You're right again. But the loan you took out using your brother's name to keep this place running, that might be his business. The change in Beck's expression was immediate and dramatic. The cocky swagger disappeared, replaced by something that looked a lot like panic. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Sure you do. Reese Derron, co-signed for a $30,000 business loan 18 months ago. Except Reese doesn't remember signing anything, does he? Funny how that works. I'd spent the better part of 2 days digging into Beck's finances, using some of the same database access tools I used for work. It was amazing what you could find when you knew where to look and had legitimate reasons to run background checks. The loan was the smoking gun I'd been hoping for. Beck had forged his brother's signature on the paperwork, probably counting on Reese never finding out. It was fraud, plain and simple, and it carried serious legal consequences. You don't know what you're messing with, Beck said, but the fight had gone out of him. I know exactly what I'm messing with. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of the loan documents I'd obtained through a records request. His signature was clearly different from his brother's, but someone had tried to match the handwriting. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to stop threatening me, and you're going to tell Vanna to stop filing false reports and making up stories. In exchange, I'll keep this information to myself. Beck stared at the phone screen, his face pale under the grease and stubble. And if I don't? Then Reese gets a copy of these documents, along with an explanation of how his credit got ruined by a loan he never signed for. I'm guessing he won't be too happy about that. The truth was, I had no intention of keeping quiet about the loan fraud regardless of what Beck did. But I wanted him to think he had some control over the situation. at least for now. You're bluffing, Beck said, but he didn't sound convinced. Am I? You want to find out? Before he could answer, a car pulled into the lot. A beat-up Honda Civic with Vanna behind the wheel. She got out and walked over to us, her face tight with anger. What are you doing here? She demanded, looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Having a conversation with your boyfriend about boundaries, I said. We've reached an understanding. Vanna looked back and forth between us, clearly sensing the tension. Beck? What's going on? Nothing, Beck said quickly. Just a misunderstanding. But I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew I had him, and he knew that everything he'd built, the shop, his relationship with his brother, maybe even his relationship with Vanna, could come crashing down with one phone call. Vanna, I said, turning to face my wife. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about, she snapped. You made your position clear when you got me fired. I didn't get you fired. You got yourself fired when you filed a false police report. Actions have consequences. She stepped closer, her face flushed with anger. You think you're so smart, don't you? Coming here threatening Beck, trying to ruin my life. I'm not trying to ruin your life. I'm trying to protect my son from the chaos you've created. Our son, she corrected. No, my son. You gave up any claim to him when you walked away at that gas station. For a moment, I thought she might hit me. Her hands were clenched into fists, and there was something wild in her eyes that I'd never seen before. You can't keep him from me, she said. I'm his mother. You're a woman who abandoned her child for another man, I replied. There's a difference. Beck stepped between us, his hands raised. Okay, that's enough. Trent, you said what you came to say. Now leave. I looked at both of them, these two people who'd blown up my life without a second thought, and felt something cold settle in my chest. You're right, I said. I should go. But before I do, let me give you both some advice. This little fantasy you're living, it's not sustainable. Beck can't support you, Vanna, and you can't support yourself anymore. Sooner or later, reality is going to come crashing down. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Beck, you might want to give your brother a call. I think he's going to want to have a conversation with you about that loan. I left them standing there and walked back to my car. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, arguing in the middle of the parking lot. Whatever they were saying, it didn't look friendly. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Trent Derron, Beck's brother. I'd found his number through the same database search that had turned up the loan information. Reese, this is Trent Ardell. I think we need to talk about your brother and a loan he took out in your name. The conversation that followed was enlightening. Reese had suspected something was wrong when his credit score tanked, but he'd never been able to figure out why. When I explained about the forged loan documents, he was furious. That son of a, he started, then caught himself. Sorry, it's just, I've been trying to get a mortgage for 2 years, and they keep telling me my debt-to-income ratio is too high. Now I know why. I can send you copies of the documents if you want to pursue legal action, I offered. Yeah, definitely. Send them over. The second call was to Carol, Lucas's daycare provider. I wanted to make sure she knew not to release my son to anyone except me, and I wanted to give her a heads up about the situation in case Vanna tried to cause problems. Oh, honey, Carol said when I explained what was happening. I'm so sorry you're going through this. Don't worry about Lucas, though. He's safe here, and I won't let anyone take him without your permission. That night, after Lucas was asleep, I sat in my living room and looked around at the life I'd built. The furniture Vanna and I had picked out together, the photos on the walls, the baby toys scattered across the floor. It should have felt empty without her, but it didn't. It felt peaceful. My phone rang around 11. Unknown number again. You think you've won something? Vanna's voice was slurred like she'd been drinking. But you haven't. I'm going to take Lucas, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." "You're drunk," I said. "I'm not drunk. I'm free. Free from you, free from that boring life, free from pretending to be happy. If you were so unhappy, why didn't you just ask for a divorce? Why the drama at the gas station? Why the false police report?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. "Because I knew you'd try to take him from me. I never would have done that. Not before all this started. But you will now." She was right, and we both knew it. The woman who'd abandoned her child at a gas station, who'd filed false police reports and was now making drunken threats, that woman couldn't be trusted with a goldfish, let alone a baby. "Get some help, Vanna," I said. "For your sake and for Lucas's. I don't need help. I need my son." The line went quiet, and I realized she'd hung up. I sat there holding the phone, thinking about the woman I'd married, and wondering when she'd turned into someone I didn't recognize. My computer chimed with an email notification. It was from Beck Derron, and the subject line read, "Thank you." The message was short. "Got the documents. Meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. Beck's going to pay for what he did." I smiled for the first time in days. The dominoes were starting to fall, and Vanna and Beck were about to learn that actions really do have consequences. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The real game was just beginning. The Riverside Motel was exactly the kind of place you'd expect two people on the run to hole up. Peeling paint, flickering neon sign, and the distinct smell of desperation hanging in the air like cheap cologne. I'd tracked them there through a combination of old-fashioned detective work and modern technology, using Beck's credit card transactions and Vanna's social media check-ins. They weren't being very careful about covering their tracks, which told me they either thought they were smarter than me or they were getting desperate. Based on what I knew about their financial situation, I was betting on desperate. It had been 2 weeks since my confrontation with Beck at his shop, and things had been moving fast. Reese had filed fraud charges against his brother, the bank had frozen the business loan pending investigation, and Beck's shop had been closed by the county for unpaid taxes. Meanwhile, Vanna had been officially terminated from Peterson, Walsh & Associates after their internal investigation concluded that she'd violated professional ethics standards. They were broke, homeless, and running out of options, which made them dangerous. I parked across the street from the motel and called Reese. We'd been in regular contact since I'd given him the loan documents, and he'd proven to be a valuable ally in my war against his brother. "They're here," I said when he answered. "Both of them?" "Beck's truck is in the parking lot, and I saw Vanna through the window of room 12. They've been here for 3 days. What's the plan?" That was the question I'd been wrestling with. I wanted to confront them, to make them face the consequences of their actions, but I also needed to be smart about it. Going in alone could backfire spectacularly. "Meet me at the diner across the street," I said. "We'll figure it out from there." 20 minutes later, Reese slid into the booth across from me at Mel's Diner, a greasy spoon that had probably been serving the same menu since the Nixon administration. He looked like an older, more responsible version of Beck, same basic features, but without the mullet and the attitude. "I still can't believe he forged my signature," Reese said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "I mean, I knew Beck was a screw-up, but I never thought he'd steal from family." "How long has he been struggling with the shop?" I asked. "Years. Ever since the economy tanked and people started holding on to their cars longer. He's not much of a businessman, you know. Good with engines, terrible with everything else." Through the diner window, I could see the motel parking lot. Beck's truck hadn't moved, and there were no signs of activity from room 12. "What do you want out of this?" I asked Reese. He was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. "I want him to admit what he did. To me, to the bank, to everyone. I want him to take responsibility for once in his life." "And if he doesn't?" "Then I press charges and let the courts handle it." I nodded. That was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. Reese wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for justice. That made him the perfect partner for what I had in mind. "What about your wife?" Reese asked. "What do you want from her?" That was a harder question. What did I want from Vanna? An apology? An explanation? For her to come crawling back? No. That ship had sailed the moment she climbed into Beck's truck at the gas station. "I want her to leave Lucas and me alone," I said finally. "I want her to stop making threats and filing false reports and trying to manipulate the situation. I want her to disappear." "You think she'll do that?" "I think she'll do whatever she has to do to survive. And right now, survival means cutting her losses and starting over somewhere else." We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the motel. A few cars came and went, but room 12 remained quiet. "So what's the plan?" Reese asked again. I pulled out my phone and showed him a text message I'd received that morning from an unknown number. "Meet me at the motel tonight at 8 p.m. Come alone. We need to talk. V." "She wants to meet," I said. "Probably to negotiate some kind of deal." "You're not going alone, are you?" "No, but I want her to think I am. Here's what we're going to do." At exactly 8 p.m., I knocked on the door of room 12. It opened immediately, like Vanna had been waiting right behind it. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. The confident, put-together woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The motel room was small and depressing, with faded wallpaper and furniture that had seen better decades. Beck was sitting on the bed, looking just as rough as Vanna. The cocky attitude from our confrontation at the shop was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Lucas?" Vanna asked as soon as I closed the door. "Safe," I said. "Which is more than I can say for him when he was with you." She flinched like I'd hit her. "That's not fair. I never put him in danger. You abandoned him at a gas station. You've been making threats and filing false reports. You're living in a motel with a man who's under investigation for fraud. How is any of that safe for a baby?" Beck stood up from the bed, his hands clenched into fists. "Watch how you talk to her." "Or what?" I asked. "You'll threaten me again? How's that working out for you so far?" "Enough," Vanna said, stepping between us. "We didn't ask you here to fight." "Then why did you ask me here?" She took a deep breath, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. "We need help," she said quietly. "We?" I looked back and forth between them. "There is no we, Vanna. You made that clear when you left." "I made a mistake," she continued. "I know that now. But we can fix this. We can work something out." "What kind of something?" Beck stepped forward. "Look, man, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but maybe we can make a deal. You drop the fraud charges against me, and I'll disappear. Leave town, leave Vanna alone, whatever you want." I almost laughed. "You think this is about you? You think I care enough about you to orchestrate some elaborate revenge scheme?" "Don't you?" Vanna asked. "No. This is about protecting my son from the chaos you two have created. Everything else is just collateral damage." That's when I heard the knock on the door. 3 sharp raps, exactly as we'd planned. Beck and Vanna both tensed. "Who is that?" Beck asked. "My backup," I said, walking over to open the door. Reese stepped into the room, and the look on Beck's face was worth the price of admission. Fear, guilt, and resignation all rolled into one expression. "Hello, brother," Reese said. "What is this?" Vanna demanded, looking back and forth between us. "This is a reckoning," I said. "Beck, meet your brother Reese, the one whose name you forged on a $30,000 loan." Beck sank back down onto the bed like his strings had been cut. "Reese, I can explain—" "Explain what?" Reese interrupted. "Explain how you stole my identity? Explain how you ruined my credit? Explain how you've been lying to me for 2 years? I was going to pay it back, Beck said weakly. With what money? Your shop is closed, you're living in a motel, and you're under investigation for fraud. Vanna was staring at Beck like she'd never seen him before. You told me you owned the shop free and clear. I do own it, Beck protested. No, Reese said. The bank owns it, and they're going to foreclose on it next week. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ancient air conditioning unit. Vanna slowly sank into the room's single chair, her face pale. How much do you know? She asked me. Everything, I said. The forged loan, the unpaid taxes, the 3 other women Beck's been seeing behind your back. That last part was a bluff, but the look on Beck's face told me I'd hit the mark. 3 other women? Vanna's voice was barely a whisper. It's not what you think, Beck started, but Reese cut him off. It's exactly what you think. Beck's been running the same game on multiple women for months. You're just the only one who fell for it. I pulled out my phone and showed Vanna a series of text messages I'd obtained through some creative social media stalking. Messages between Beck and at least 2 other women, all of them containing the same promises, the same lies, the same manipulation tactics he'd used on her. You're not special, Vanna, I said. You're just convenient. A woman with a job and a stable husband who could provide financial security while Beck figured out his next move. She stared at the phone screen, reading the messages. With each one, her face grew paler and her hands shook more. This isn't real, she said finally. You made these up. Call the numbers, I suggested. Ask them about Beck Derron and his promises to leave his current girlfriend for them. She didn't call. She didn't need to. The truth was written all over Beck's face. You used me, she said, turning to look at him. No, baby, it's not like that. You used me to get back at Trent. You used me for money and a place to stay. You used me because I was stupid enough to believe you actually cared. Beck reached for her, but she pulled away. Don't touch me. Vanna, please, let me explain. Explain what? How you've been lying to me from the beginning? How you destroyed my marriage, my job, my relationship with my son, all for what? For some sick game? She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. She pushed past all of us and walked out of the room, leaving the door open behind her. Through the doorway, I could see her pacing back and forth in the parking lot, her phone pressed to her ear. Now what? Beck asked, looking at his brother. Now you face the consequences, Reese said. You're going to sign a confession admitting to the loan fraud. You're going to cooperate with the bank investigation, and you're going to pay back every penny you stole from me, even if it takes the rest of your life. And if I don't? Then I press charges and you go to prison. Your choice. Beck looked at me. What about you? What do you want? I want you to stay away from my family. I want you to leave town and never come back. I want you to disappear. That's it? That's it. You're not worth anything more complicated than that. He nodded slowly. Okay, yeah, I can do that. Vanna came back into the room, her face streaked with tears. I called one of those numbers, she said to me. You were right. He's been telling her the same lies he told me. She turned to Beck. We're done. Pack your stuff and get out. Vanna, come on. Get out, she screamed, and for a moment the mask of composure she'd been wearing completely slipped. Get out before I do something we'll both regret. Beck looked around the room at the 3 of us, seemed to realize he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and started gathering his things. It didn't take long. Apparently he traveled light. This isn't over, he said as he headed for the door. Yeah, it is, Reese said. You just don't know it yet. After Beck left, the room fell quiet again. Vanna sat back down in the chair, staring at her hands. I'm sorry, she said without looking up. For which part? I asked. All of it. The gas station, the police report, the threats, everything. Why, Vanna? Why throw away everything we had for him? She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because I was scared. Scared of being ordinary, scared of being trapped, scared of becoming my mother. Beck represented something different, something exciting. I thought he could save me from my boring life. Our life wasn't boring. We were building something together. I know that now. But by the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late to fix it. She finally looked up at me, and I saw the woman I'd married again. Not the manipulative person who'd filed false police reports or the desperate woman who'd been living in a motel, but the person I'd once loved. Is it too late? She asked. Is there any chance we could? Yes, I said, cutting her off. It's too late. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I'll have divorce papers drawn up, I continued. You can have visitation with Lucas, supervised at first, but you can see him. I'm not going to keep him from you completely. Thank you, she whispered. But if you ever file another false report, if you ever try to manipulate the situation or use Lucas as a weapon, I'll make sure you never see him again. Do you understand? I understand. Reese and I left her there in that motel room, crying over the wreckage of the life she'd chosen to destroy. As we walked across the parking lot to our cars, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not victory, just emptiness. You okay? Reese asked. I will be, I said. What about you? You got what you wanted from Beck? Yeah. He'll sign the confession tomorrow and the bank will get their money back eventually. Justice served. We shook hands in the parking lot, two men who'd been brought together by betrayal, and found a way to make things right. Take care of yourself, Trent, Reese said, and take care of that little boy. I will. As I drove home that night, I thought about the man I'd been 3 weeks ago, the passive, accommodating husband who'd let his wife walk all over him, the man who'd stood in that gas station parking lot, holding his crying baby, watching his world collapse. That man was gone. In his place was someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes you have to fight for what matters. I'd won the war, but the victory felt hollow. Vanna was broken, Beck was finished, and I was alone with a baby who would grow up asking questions about why his mother wasn't around. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw Mrs. Platt's porch light come on, she was probably watching from behind her curtains, ready to hear all about my evening. I realized something important. I wasn't alone. I had Lucas. I had people like Carol and Mrs. Platt who cared about us. And I had a life to rebuild. The war was over. Now it was time to figure out how to live with the peace. 6 months later, I stood in the community center auditorium, holding Lucas on my hip while he babbled at the crowd of people gathered for the monthly town meeting. He was walking now, or at least taking a few wobbly steps before falling down, and his vocabulary consisted mainly of da-da and no, though he used both with impressive frequency. The town meeting wasn't exactly thrilling entertainment, but it was part of my new routine. After everything that had happened with Vanna and Beck, I'd made an effort to become more involved in the community. It was partly for Lucas. I wanted him to grow up knowing he belonged somewhere, and partly for me. Isolation had made it too easy for Vanna to manipulate the narrative when our marriage fell apart. This time, I wanted people to know who I really was. The budget proposal for the new playground equipment has been approved, Mayor Henderson announced from the podium. Construction will begin next month, pending final approval from the state. A smattering of applause rippled through the crowd. I was clapping along when I saw her. Vanna, standing near the back of the auditorium, looking nervous and out of place. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her at the motel, and her hair was shorter, styled differently. She looked more like the woman I'd married, and less like the desperate person who'd been living on the run with Beck. Our eyes met across the room, and she gave me a tentative wave. I nodded back, but didn't smile. We'd been communicating through lawyers for months, working out the details of the divorce and Lucas's custody arrangement. This was the first time I'd seen her in person since that night at the motel. The meeting dragged on for another 20 minutes. Budget discussions, zoning issues, a heated debate about the proposed dog park that got way more passionate than it had any right to. Lucas got restless, so I took him outside to the lobby where he could crawl around on the carpet without disturbing anyone. He's gotten so big. I turned around to find Vanna standing in the doorway, watching Lucas as he pulled himself up on a chair and took a few unsteady steps. "Kids do that," I said. She walked over slowly, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Would it be okay if I said hello to him?" I considered it. According to our custody agreement, Vanna was allowed supervised visits with Lucas twice a week, but she'd only used that privilege a handful of times since the divorce was finalized. Each visit had been awkward and brief, with Lucas clinging to me and Vanna looking like she didn't know what to do with her own son. "Go ahead," I said. She knelt down on the carpet, and Lucas immediately toddled over to her, curious about this new person. He didn't remember her. He'd been too young when she left, and their supervised visits hadn't been frequent enough to form a real bond. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly, and I heard her voice crack slightly. "You probably don't remember me, but I'm your mommy." Lucas stared at her for a moment, then looked back at me as if asking for permission to be friendly. I nodded, and he turned back to Vanna with a shy smile. "Dada," he said, pointing at me. "That's right," Vanna said. "That's your daddy. He takes very good care of you, doesn't he?" We sat there in the lobby for a few minutes, watching Lucas explore the space while Vanna asked careful questions about his development, his eating habits, his sleep schedule. Normal parent stuff, but coming from her it felt strange, like she was trying to learn about a child she'd never met. "How are you doing?" I asked when Lucas got distracted by a water fountain. "Better," she said. "I'm working at a dental office in the next town over, just receptionist work, but it's steady. I'm renting a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it's mine." "That's good." "I've been going to counseling," she continued, "trying to figure out how I made such a mess of everything." I didn't respond to that. What was I supposed to say? That it was okay? That everyone makes mistakes? Some mistakes are too big for easy forgiveness. "What happened to Beck?" I asked instead. "He left town after he signed the confession for your brother-in-law. I heard he moved to Florida, but I don't really know. We don't keep in touch." "Good." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been regret. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," she said, "but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry, Trent, not just for leaving, but for how I left, for the lies I told, the reports I filed, the way I tried to make you the villain in a story where I was the one who messed up." "Okay," I said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that I understand what I did wrong." Lucas had discovered that he could make the automatic water fountain turn on by waving his hands in front of the sensor, and he was giggling with delight every time the water started flowing. "He's happy," Vanna said, watching him play. "Most of the time, yeah." "Does he ask about me?" I considered lying, but decided on honesty instead. "No, he doesn't really understand the concept of having a mother who isn't around." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. That's probably for the best. People started filing out of the auditorium as the meeting ended. I recognized most of them, neighbors, parents from Lucas's daycare, people I'd gotten to know over the past few months. Several of them stopped to say hello and coo over Lucas, who was always happy to be the center of attention. Mrs. Platt emerged from the auditorium and made a beeline for us, her eyes fixed on Vanna with undisguised curiosity. "Well, well," she said when she reached us. "Look who's back in town." "Hello, Mrs. Platt," Vanna said quietly. "I heard you were working over in Millerville now. How's that going for you?" There was an edge to Mrs. Platt's voice that made it clear this wasn't just friendly small talk. She'd been one of my strongest supporters during the worst of the drama, and she clearly hadn't forgotten or forgiven what Vanna had done. "It's going fine, thank you," Vanna replied. "That's nice. I'm sure it's quite an adjustment, going from a law office to a dental practice." "Mrs. Platt," I interrupted, sensing where this was heading. "We should probably get Lucas home. It's past his bedtime." "Of course, dear," she said, but her eyes never left Vanna. "You take care of that precious baby. Some of us know how lucky he is to have such a devoted father." The message was clear. Vanna wasn't welcome here, and everyone knew what she'd done. Mrs. Platt walked away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. "I should go," Vanna said. "Probably a good idea." She knelt down again and gave Lucas a gentle hug. He tolerated it for a few seconds before squirming to get down. "Bye-bye," she said to him. "Bye-bye," he repeated, waving enthusiastically. It was one of his newer words, and he used it for everyone whether they were leaving or not. Vanna stood up and looked at me. "Thank you for letting me talk to him." "He's your son too," I said. "Despite everything that's happened, that hasn't changed. Will you, if he ever asks about me, will you tell him I love him?" "Yeah, I'll tell him." She nodded and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. I watched her go, this woman who'd once been the center of my world, and felt nothing but a kind of distant sadness. Lucas tugged on my pants leg, ready to go home. I picked him up and headed for the door, nodding goodbye to the few people still lingering in the lobby. The drive home was quiet, except for Lucas babbling in his car seat. He'd had a long day, and I could tell he was getting cranky. By the time we got to the house, he was rubbing his eyes and making the fussy sounds that meant bedtime couldn't come soon enough. I carried him upstairs and went through our nightly routine: diaper change, pajamas, bottle, story time. He was asleep before I finished reading Goodnight Moon, his little fist curled around his favorite stuffed elephant. I stood in his doorway for a few minutes, watching him sleep and thinking about the conversation with Vanna. She'd seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely changed, but I'd learned not to trust appearances when it came to her. Actions mattered more than words, and her actions over the past 6 months had been minimal at best. Downstairs, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone. There was a text from Carol asking if I needed her to watch Lucas tomorrow evening. I'd mentioned possibly going to a movie with some co-workers. There was an email from my lawyer about finalizing some paperwork. There was a Facebook notification about a friend's birthday, normal life stuff. Boring maybe, but stable, predictable, safe. My phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. "Thank you for tonight. It meant everything to me to see him, even for a few minutes." Vanna, obviously. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decide whether to respond. Finally, I typed back. "He needs consistency. If you want to be part of his life, you need to show up regularly, not just when it's convenient." The response came quickly. "I know. I'm trying to figure out how to do that without making things harder for both of you. The custody agreement gives you 2 visits a week. You've used maybe 6 of them in 3 months. I know. I was afraid. I didn't want to confuse him. Or upset you." I almost laughed. After everything she'd put us through, she was worried about upsetting me? "It's not about me," I typed. "It's about him. Either you want to be his mother or you don't, but you can't be a part-time parent when it suits you." "You're right. I'll do better." I didn't respond to that. I'd heard promises from Vanna before, and they weren't worth much. If she wanted to prove she'd changed, she could do it through actions, not words. I finished my wine and went upstairs to check on Lucas one more time before bed. He was still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the adult drama swirling around him. In his world, life was simple. Eat, sleep, play, learn new words, take wobbly steps across the living room. I envied him, that simplicity. As I got ready for bed, I thought about the man I'd been a year ago. Married, comfortable, naive enough to think that love and good intentions were enough to hold a relationship together. That man seemed like a stranger now. The man I'd become was harder, more suspicious, less willing to trust. But he was also stronger, more self-reliant, better equipped to protect the people who mattered to him. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I had. And despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and betrayal and public humiliation, I was okay with that. Lucas and I were okay. We were more than okay. We were thriving. And if Vanna wanted to be part of that, she was going to have to earn it. The war was over, but the peace was still being negotiated. And this time, I was the one setting the terms.